The group policy processing order has 4 locations that allow group policies to be linked. The first location that I can link group policy is at the local level. A local group policy setting applies to the local computer that it's configured on. If I have 10 computers and I configure a local group policy object, this would require me to physically touch each of the individual machines, and I would have to define the same setting on each of those machines. So there is no centralized administration with local group policy objects. Local group policy objects are by far the least commonly used. If I want to edit a local group policy object, I can go to the run box or the command prompt, and I can type gpedit.msc. That command will open the local group policy editor, allowing you to make changes that affect your local machine. I also could go to run or the command prompt and type MMC. MMC actually stands for Microsoft Management Console. Running the command MMC opens a blank console window. In that console window, I will have the ability to add group policy as a snap-in that will allow me to manage all the local group policy settings on my machine. If my computer has been joined to a domain, I have site-level policies that can be applied. A site represents a physical location within Active Directory. An example of a site would be a branch office. If I have an office in Toronto and another office in Miami and another office in Atlanta, I would have a site for each of those locations. A site policy would allow me to specify settings that would only apply if you were in the Toronto office. An example of a site-level policy would be a printer. If I want your default printer to be defined through group policy, I may want that printer to change based on your physical location. If you are in Toronto, I want you to use a default printer that's in Toronto. Next week, if you travel for work to the Atlanta location, I may want your default printer to automatically be defined as a printer in the Atlanta office. If I define my printer policy at a site level, it dynamically changes based on the site your computer is physically located in. A site is represented by an IP subnet, always associated with a physical location. In more basic terms, the easiest way to think of a site-level policy is just a way to say, I want you to get this setting because right now you are in Toronto. When you're no longer in Toronto, I do not want you to get this setting applied. The domain policy is linked to the domain level. The domain policy applies to all user accounts in the domain and all computer accounts in the domain. Not a lot of settings are defined at the domain level. We would exercise much caution when I define a domain level policy. A policy at this level would apply to every computer. That would include Windows 7, Windows 10 clients, laptops and desktops. Policies would also apply to all of my servers, even domain controllers. There are just not a lot of settings that are so common that every computer from Windows 7 to Windows 10 to your file server to your domain controller, not often will they need the same exact settings. At a user level, a domain policy applies to every user account that exists. This would be the domain administrator, the CEO, the person we hired this morning. So every user would process those settings. Again, not a lot of settings are so common that every single user in the domain needs the same exact settings. By far, the most common level that group policy is applied is at the organizational unit level, or OU. The OU level is as close as I can get to a user or computer to have a policy applied. For example, I may have a sales OU, a human resource OU, a marketing OU. Every department in my company may be divided into a separate OU within the Active Directory domain. On my machine, I'm going to go to Start. I'm going to right-click on Start and in Run, I'm going to type gpedit.msc. This opens the local group policy editor on my machine. This command you can run on a Windows client machine, a server, Any Windows operating system will allow you to run this gpedit.msc command. I'm going to maximize this window here and resize this so it's a bit easier to see. You'll notice I have the computer configuration settings and the user configuration settings. Any settings I define at this level will only apply on this one machine. Now, some settings apply when the computer starts up. That would be any setting under computer configuration. Other settings will apply when your user logs on. An example of some of those settings: if I expand administrative templates under computer configuration, I'm going to go to System, and under System I have Device Installation. So I'm going to open Device Installation, and I'm going to open Device Installation Restrictions. Under the restrictions, one of the options is Prevent Installation of Removable Devices. If I were to open that setting, I could simply click Enable. If I were to do that, Enable Prevent Installation of Removable Devices, no user that ever logs into this computer would be able to use a removable device. So a USB flash drive or anything similar simply would not work on this device. To look at an example of a user configuration setting, I'm going to close the Prevent Installation of Removable Devices window, and I'm going to navigate down to my user configuration. Here under user configuration, an example of a setting I could define here, I will expand administrative templates and control panel. A few options. 1. Prohibit access to control panel and PC settings. If I were to enable that setting, you would not be able to open control panel on your own machine. Or if I go to the desktop settings, I could hide and disable all items on the desktop. I could hide Internet Explorer on the desktop. If I were to choose that, if I enable that setting, you would no longer have IE on the desktop, and you would not have the ability to directly add it back to your desktop. But again, these settings only apply to the one machine I'm actually on. Not extremely common that I wanted to find settings at that level, because it would still require me to configure each computer. The MMC we discussed, I'm going to go back to Run, and in Run I will type MMC. When I click OK, it opens this empty console window. I'm going to put this console in full screen. When I go to File, there's an option to Add Remove Snap-in. When I select Add Remove Snap-in, if I scroll down this list a bit, Group Policy Object is one of the things in the list. I will add that. Right now it says Local Computer. A unique setting, if I do this through the MMC, if I browse, now I could choose another computer. We still consider this to be a local setting, because if I did specify another computer here, this setting would only apply to that remote machine that I'm actually connected to. So still not an extremely common tool.